الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ونعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Today is going to be a very interesting subject to discuss because we are now going to go into some prehistory. We're going to look at genealogy. We're going to trace back the origins of the two tribes mentioned, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, to understand who they are, where they come from, and who are they at the present state. Who are they in the world today? We're going to start with their first mention based on Dhul Qarnayn's journey, because the Jews asked the question and Allah revealed the answer. The Jews asked about the traveler who journeyed to two ends of the land, Dhul Qarnayn, to two extremities of the land, two extremities of human civilization as it was at that time. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called their bluff on the matter, and He revealed now a third journey, the thing that they were really after. And there is great wisdom behind whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. This is the wa'adul haq that He will show in the Quran, that Dhul Qarnayn told those people when he built the barrier that the promise of my Lord is going to come true and the barrier will be brought down. And upon revelation of this to the Jews, the barrier was brought down. This barrier, during the Prophet ﷺ's time, there were witnesses, travelers who went there, and they came back and described it to the Prophet. And Rasulullah said, indeed, you have described the barrier of Dhul Qarnayn. But during Umar radiallahu anhu's time, there were expeditions sent to take a look to see if there was any reinforcement required. And the reports came back that the barrier had been reduced to rubble. It had been destroyed. So something happened in between this decade or so, between the Prophet's death and Umar radiallahu anhu's khilafah. Something happened in between. The Prophet ﷺ had woken up from a terrible dream in which he exclaimed out of that angst, Wailun lil Arab, he said, woe unto the Arabs, min sharrin qad iqtaraba, from a grave calamity that is going to befall them. And his wife Zainab bint Jahsh asked him, Ya Rasulullah, are we going to be destroyed? We, the Muslims, we, the Arabs at that time. And he said, yes, now. إِذَا كَثْرَتِ الْخَبَثِ, when immorality is going to prevail in the Arab lands. Now, all these indicators that you see from the Quran and from the Hadith are meant to conceptualize. And then you look at the reality of what is happening and you put two and two together. You look at the immorality prevailing and you'll be able to distinguish where is this immorality coming from. How is it that a people who were steadfast on the Islamic way of life are now beginning to let that steadfastness go to the extent of now falling into immorality? What is actually happening? The descriptive is given by the Quran, that a righteous way of life is that which is ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as what is natural, and it's on a natural path because it appeals to the natural state of the human being, the fitrah. The fitrah is always inclined towards good, is always inclined towards the guidance that it receives from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you begin to corrupt that, when you begin to oppose that, the way Iblis opposed and gave Adam, using fancy words and terminologies, presented an ideology that was in opposition to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordained, then that individual starts getting corrupted internally. And it is not a corruption of the outward form, it is the corruption of the inward state. This is what is going to be described by the Quran. So when Dhul Qarnayn finished his second journey where he arrived at the easternmost extreme now. So first he went to the westernmost side, the Ainin Hamia, which we identified as the Black Sea. Now his journey took him towards the east, to the other extreme, and the east of the Black Sea is the Caspian Sea. Now, prior to the great flood, this is going back almost 8,000 years, archaeologists found ruins of ancient cities in the Black Sea and in the Caspian Sea, indicative that these two bodies of water were not yet formed at the time. It is post of the flood that these two bodies of water were formed, and they were, at the time of the flood, one entirely submerged region. It is afterwards, when the waters receded, that the two bodies were then formed as two seas. On the eastern extreme is where he encountered the Caspian Sea, and that is where he met a people who were still in their primitive civility. They were still not yet advanced, which the Quran describes. Lam naj'al lahum min duniha sitra. They had been given no protection from the sun, whether it was physical shelter or just clothing. And Dhul Qarnayn was tested at this point. In the first instant, he was tested by the sabab of knowledge, how he will implement what he knows, how he will govern the people, how he will distinguish them. Now he is being tested by power, because he has been given the power in the land, the might to conquer, and he's tested by that power. What does he do to these people? Is he going to subjugate them? Is he going to take them over? Is he going to colonize them, conquer them? This is the par excellence of someone who has been given power by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that power rests on the foundations of faith. Because what the godless people have done, which is clear and apparent from documented history of the last 1200, 1300 years, is that whenever they arrived at a place where the civility of those people did not agree with their ideology, they attempted to change those people, rather than allow those cultures to develop by themselves, to become civilizations by themselves. This is a very astounding matter, because if Dhul Qarnayn had conquered those people at the Caspian, then the roots of the Persian people would not have been established. This is what you call a pivotal moment in history, that a person can make a choice whose repercussions can be felt centuries down the line. The Persian people honored Dhul Qarnayn. It is part and parcel of their symbolism. The crown that they developed with two horns, which is affiliated to Dhul Qarnayn, it is symbolic and a mark of who he was. He was the person who gave these people the chance to grow and develop. They have honored him. Cyrus the Great, who eventually conquered Media and Lydia and Babylon to expand the Persian Empire, he records in what's called the Cyrus cylinder. They used to write on cylinders, and they would mark using a stylus, clay cylinders. Part of the cylinder is obscured, but part of it reads, and he honors Dhul Qarnayn. He doesn't, it's not, part of it is, it's obscured, so we don't know what the name is. The name has been broken off from the cylinder. But he honors this, and he says that I went to the furthest north, and he found the wall, the barrier, and he reinforced it. He repaired it with copper and bronze, and he found the inscription of the great king who built it. This is clear indication that Cyrus the Great is not Dhul Qarnayn. Neither is Alexander, because they also called the gates of Alexander, and the Romans like to attribute it to Alexander the Great who built them. He didn't. He reinforced what Cyrus had enforced. And Cyrus reinforced what Dhul Qarnayn had built. So he left those people to develop and grow by themselves. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَدْ أَحَتْنَا بِمَا لَدَيْهِ خُبْرًا. We encompassed all that we needed to encompass about him. So that now the next journey was unfolded for him. He was now given the honor to make the third part of the journey. فَأَتْبَعَ ثُمَّ أَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا. So now he followed a means. Now this is the means of alat, of instrumentation. The first was the means of ilm, and then the means of qudra, power. He was tested with his knowledge, then he was tested with the power he had been given, now he's going to be tested with the means or the instruments or the tools that he has at his disposal. How is he going to utilize those tools? So he journeyed now on the third, heading northward. Fakhruddin al-Razi says in his tafsir that this was a northern journey. It was headed towards the north where Ya'juj and Ma'juj were located. Hatta idha balagha, until he arrived, bayna as-saddain, between two mountainscapes. Sad or sadda is a barrier. It can also be a cliff or an escarpment. So between two escarpments, and these are geographically identified between the Caspian and the Black Sea as the Caucasus range of mountains. The Caucasus range of mountains are part of the Eurasian steppe. And this is like a rift in between the two. So on both sides, Saddain, there are two cliffs on either side. Between the two cliffs, وَجَدَ مِن دُونِهِمَا قَوْمًا, and he found there, in between the two, a people. These people are now identified as the Parthian people going back in history, or in present time you would identify them as the Georgian people. And their language is very ancient. It has not changed or evolved. According to many linguists, it has not changed or evolved for over 4,000 years. It's still the same basic root language. It's like Arabic in that sense. He found a people, لا يكادون يفقهون قوله, who did not understand his speech, which clearly indicates that they were of a different race than he was. They were not Semitic people. This is a marker from the Quran, because language identifies who the people are. They were not Semitic people, and when I go to the genealogy, you'll understand where exactly their descent comes from. They couldn't understand him, which means communication had to be established over some time, either through a translator or learning each other's speech. But there was time that passed while he was there. It's also indicative that this third journey is where he spent the longest time. This is where he spent the longest of his stay, comparative to the other two journeys or to the other two extremities. Walaikum salam. So here, these people, once the communication between them was established, they asked him for a favor. They asked him, Ya Dhul Qarnayn, O Dhul Qarnayn, Inna Ya'juj wa Ma'juj mufsiduna fil ard. Indeed, Gog and Magog, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, are corruptors in the land. And I'm going to spend a lot more time on just this one phrase, because this is the concept here. From this is where everything else opens up. And so they asked him, فَهَلْ نَجْعَلُ لَكَ خَرْجًا عَلَىٰ أَن تَجْعَلَ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَهُمْ صَدًّا. Can we commission you, pay you, so that you can erect between us and between them a sad, a barrier? Can we pay you? Now remember what Musa alayhi salam told Al-Khidr, that you can take fair compensation for doing what you did, the act of kindness that you did, that you built that wall for them. You can take fair compensation. So he's being offered fair compensation. This is where the test is going to lie. He's got the means, and he's following those means. How is he going to use those means? This is what's going to be examined now as he starts the process, the whole project and the undertaking that he goes through. But the main focus, inshallah, today is going to be just this one phrase, Inna Ya'juj wa Ma'juj mufsiduna fil ard, because once you understand this phrase, everything else will become clear. Why he is building the barrier? Why did he build that kind of barrier? And what is the implication going forward? Because it would appear that the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has intended for human history to end is an intent that goes way back through time. His amr was already set, and the pieces are being set accordingly. They plan their plan, but Allah plans His plans, and He is the greatest of planners. The inna in that statement is a tawqid. It is an emphasis. There is and you don't find this in the English language. There is no equation in English grammar of an emphasis in statement, unless you actually use the word verily or indeed or alas. But there is no such emphasis in the English language. When emphasis is applied in the Arabic language, it really drives home the point. Inna ya'juj ma'juj. Indeed, these two. And now comes the root attribute of these people. The word is fasada. The word is fasad. It comes from fasada. The meme is to show that it is to convert them into a proper noun. It is like salama is peace. It is also submissiveness. From there you get Islam. So submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the proper noun of the person who submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Muslim. That's where the meme comes in the beginning of the term. So the definition is that this is who they are. It's not just something they do. It's not just an action. It is who they are. It is their core definition. They are corruptors through and through. A Muslim is who you are. It's not just something you do. You don't do Islam. Right? You practice Islam, but you don't do Islam. It's not an action. It's who you are. It's what defines who you are. In the existential question that a human being would ask, who am I? And what is my destiny? This is who you are. You are a Muslim, a submission, as an Abdullah, a slave of Allah. That is your destiny. This is who they are. Fasad is their core descriptive. Now, fasad is an interesting term in and of itself, because it's one of those terms that are interrelated. Arabic is very interrelated in its terminologies and meanings. Fasada, hasada, and jasada are interrelated terms. The hasada is the envy portion, or the jealousy, the inner disease that causes one to want to corrupt that which has been ordained. This is what Iblis did. He presented an ideology or a philosophy because of the envy in his heart, to corrupt what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordained. And that's what he did in his waswasa. After he had the hasad, he threw cast the hasad on Adam and Hawa. Then he did the waswasa, the means. This is how he enacted it. And then he corrupted them, corrupted their thinking. So the hasad resulted in the fasad. Dajjal is somebody who cannot do anything by himself because he doesn't have the depth to do it. Dajjal is somebody who cannot do anything by himself. Ultimately he's useless. But he's got the incredible number of tools at his disposal that he can use. And for him to successfully use those tools, they have to be convincing enough as the right tools for the other person to attribute to. He also needs his minions. He needs his people who will enact the actions for him, because he hasn't yet, the khuruj of Dajjal, the physical manifestation or biological manifestation into our world of existence, has not yet taken place. But his actions and their manifestations are evident through intermediaries. And these are the intermediaries. Because for him to succeed in his fitna, in his deception, as Dajjala, which is his core description, Dajjal is the corrupt, is the imposter, the liar, the deceiver. He has to corrupt what has already been set first, so that he can then replace it with something else. And this will also be seen in Ya'juj and Ma'juj. So he's using these people to cause the corruption. Once it has been corrupted, then he can apply and set his own plan in motion. And this is how he creates the jasad. The jasada is a hollow being. In Arabic, there is jism and then there is jasad. The jism is a body that is occupied, has a substance. So you are, in your biological form, you have a jism. The human being is jism, nafs and ruh. Because you are occupying that body, it is a jism. It has substance, it has motion, it has purpose. When you pass away and you leave that body, it now becomes a jasad, a hollow body. And this is what you call, even in the English, you would just call it the body. You have to wash the body and bury the body and whatnot. That is the jasad. In your existence, while you're alive, you become a jasad when your true essence has been diminished. And it begins by corrupting that essence and then diminishing that essence. So that now you are just a mechanical object. You're something that does what it's told, like a machine. You're programmed to do something and you follow the procedures and you follow the law and you follow the rules and you live out your existence like this. These people do not understand, and they will never understand, the divine aspect of the human being's creation. To them, this body, this human being, via their corruption of knowledge itself, is just some random event in the process of evolution. You are just something. And then this group that is here will finish its whatever it needs to do. And then the next group will come. And the ultimate objective of this group, the purpose, is to live out a utopia of distraction and entertainment. This is what the human being is, according to them. This is their cosmology, which is not really cosmology in the definition of cosmology. It is something that is just convoluted, and it is a corrupted mode. Their ideology is not to abide by the laws of physis, of nature, from the Greek word physis. It is to abide by the rules of techna, which is craft. This is where the word technology comes from. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks, are you then going to worship that which you have crafted by your own hands? This is the technology. Is this what you're going to worship? Whereas Allah is the one who created the maker and the thing that He makes. Allah created the maker and the thing that He makes. He is the one supreme. Are you going to worship that low piece? Because this is what's been created for us. Worshipping technology. All the advances that are made for that purpose. So the descriptive of Ya'juj and Ma'juj is now going to be given in the Arabic sense. Why are they called Ya'juj and Ma'juj? Mufsiduna is their attribute. This is what they do. Unless they turn on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that fasad turns from Mufsiduna fil ard to being Muslim. And the ard in this context of the ayah is at that point limited to that region of civility. That's the land of civility, of human civilization it was at that time. But in the modern concept, it is the entire globe. This is where the other side of the ayah comes in. وَهُمْ مِنْ كُلِّ حَدَبٍ يَنْسِلُونَ. Spread out from every elevation all around the world. Muhammad Iqbal made his connection in when Israel was formed in one of his poems. खुल गए याजूज और माजूज के लक्शर तमाम चश्मे मुस्लिम अब देखे मतलबे हदबी यंसिलून. That the gates of Ya'juj and Ma'juj have been opened up. They've already started spreading out, because that's the connection with that other ayah. Hatta idha futihat Ya'juj wa Ma'juj. That the people who are banned are returning back to their town, because Ya'juj and Ma'juj have been released. So the intelligent Muslim should now take a look, re-examine the meaning of what it means for them to spread out. Because it's not just a group of goblins that are just going to eat every tree and whatever. These are corruptors in the land. They corrupt every aspect of existence. Physical and metaphysical, logical and ontological. In fact, they have no even teleological purpose to life. They cannot explain to you the meaning, the purpose of your existence, or the existence of everything. Because they have corrupted themselves and are now corrupting everything else. Ya'juj and Ma'juj in the Arabic follow the pattern. The root word comes from ajaja, which is the fa'ala. Ajaja means to light up, to fire up, to start a fire, to instigate, right? To inflame or to ablaze. And it follows the root of fa'ala yaf'ulu. Fa'ala yaf'ulu. So it's ajaja ya'juju. Ajaja ya'juju. And then it is the maf'ulu part of it, which is the ma'juju. So fa'ala yaf'ulu ma'juju, maf'ulu. Ajaja, Ya'juju, Ma'juju. And then the plural of it is Ya'juj and then Ma'juj with the waw in between. So it's the plurality of these people. The Ya'juj portion of it, Ya'jaja, Ya'juju, is the corruption aspect. It's the ruination. So Ajaja, he did it in the past, he ruined it in the past. Ya'juju is doing it at present. It's in the fi'lu madi, that is fi'lu mudari, doing it in the present. The Ma'juj portion is actually the rectification of it. This is the interesting dynamic between the two. You've got one group that brings the corruption, then you've got the other group that tries to rectify the corruption. Means that they ruin what has already been set and then they build it back up according to their own ideology. So the clear-cut example is the corruption that's taking place right in front of us over the last year or so. They bring the poison into society and they call it COVID-19. And then they will come by and give you the solution to that, which is the vaccine of COVID-19. They will corrupt the system and then they will introduce the solution. Right? Problem, reaction, solution. This is classic in their philosophy. It's known as the Hegelian dialect. Create the problem, look at the reaction, and then present the solution. So now they are the saviors. So we have made the world better. And this is their core ideology. When it is told to them, which we'll look at later on, Surah Kahf will expand on this ideology as well. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Don't cause corruption in the land. What do they say? Oh, we believe in freedom of expression and human rights and all liberty, right? We're just trying to make the world a better place. This is their ideology, and that's what the Quran says. قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. We are just do-gooders. We're just trying to make the world a better place. What's wrong with that? أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. Allah says, no, they are the ones corrupting. وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Sha'ra, they don't even have the sha'ra is a feeling, it's so sensitive. Like, you know, when somebody tickles you, right? They just touches a hair on your skin. That's sha'ra. That's how they don't even have that much of sensitivity, of a sense that they are the ones corrupting. This is who they are. They have got no idea. They think they're doing the right thing. Gog and Magog are an ummah of Bani Adam. Gog is an ummah of Bani Adam and Magog is an ummah of Bani Adam. The Prophet ﷺ said they are human beings. The Prophet Nuh ﷺ had 4 sons. One of his sons perished in the flood because of his own stupidity. Kinan. He said, no, I'm going to climb the highest mountain and I will be saved. You people can go in the boat that you've built. So he climbed the highest mountain and the flood covered that mountain. And he died. His 3 surviving sons were Ham, Sham, and Yafet. And when the flood subsided and the ark settled, they were told to disperse into the land. So Yafet was allocated the lands north, which is the north of the Eurasian steppe, as I mentioned. Sham was given the lands of the Middle Eastern region, which is why his descendants are called Semites, or the Semitic people. And Ham was given North Africa. So his descendants are called the Hamites or Hamites. From Ham came the people of Punt and Kush. Those who know African heritage, there are basically 3 groups of dominant people that settled eventually in Central and Eastern Africa. The Kushites, the Nilotes, the Bantu. And present day East Africans are essentially a mixture of the Arabs and the Bantu, which is where the language of Swahili comes from. So the Kush are essentially the northeastern people. The Ethiopians, the Eritreans, the Somali. The Funt are essentially the Libyans, the Tunisians. And the Mizraim are the ancestors of the Egyptian people. And they are predominantly the Hamites. The word Egypt is not actually their name. The word Egypt is something that the Greeks placed on them because they couldn't pronounce these words, these terms. The Greeks had an issue with because it's dialectic. So they call them Egyptians, but they're actually Mizraim, which is why the Quran continuously refers to them as Misr, not Egypt. Egypt is an English term now. From Sham came the Semitic people, the Sumerians, the Mesopotamians, the Assyrians. From the Mesopotamians and Sumerians, then came the Babylonians. One of the descent of the Babylonians from the lineage of Sham is Arphaxad, who was the ancestor of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who then from him came the Ismailites and the Israelites, who are essentially now predominantly the Arabs and the Hebrew. But this was just one lineage. It's not that all the Arabs are Ismailites. No, it's just one lineage, one dominant lineage from that. There came the Nabateans, there came the Assyrians, the Arabs. These are the Semitic people. Now, this is something that you will see dominantly in Ya'juj and Ma'juj's propagation. If you say something wrong about the Jews, you're being anti-Semitic. What does anti-Semitic mean? Anti-Semitic applies to anyone in the Semitic region. So when they're dropping their bombs on the Arab people, they are also being anti-Semitic. This is the fallacy of their ideologies. This is the stupidity that they have. And it's unfortunate that we cannot recognize this stupidity. But when you say anti-Semitic, it applies even to the Iranian people. Because the Iranian people, the Persians, trace their lineage back to Media, which is where the first place that Cyrus conquered and then turned it into Persia. The Madian people are descended from Madai. Madai is a son of Yafit, who married a daughter of Sham. And he didn't want to live in his father's land, so he was given land by his father-in-law, Sham. And that was the land of Madai, or Madian, to whom the people, the Prophet Shu'aib was sent to. These are also Semitic people. So atrocities in the present against the Iranian people is also anti-Semitic. Yafet is the one who had the greatest number of sons. From him come the descendants of the Rus, the Kiev, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Aboriginals, going further south into New Zealand, going further south into the Malay people and the Indonesians, the Indian people, and then going further north into the Celts, the Vikings, the Scandinavians, into the Anglo-Celts, the Germanic people, and further east. It's a complete dispersion. He had the greatest number of sons. His two eldest sons, his eldest son's name was Gyges, or Gog, from where Ya'juj comes from. And his second son was Magog. From Gyges or Gog, or what the Bible describes as Gomer, came three sons. Togarma, who are the descendants of the Anatolian people, the Parthians, the Greeks, who are dominant in the Anatolian region of modern-day Turkey. Rifat, from him came the Celts and the Vikings and the Nords and the Scandinavians. But Ashkenaz was the person who decided to maintain his father's pure line. From Ashkenaz came the Ashkenazi people. And because the Greeks could not pronounce the term Ashkenazi, they called them Scythian. So these were the Scythian people. And they intermarried between the descendants of Magog as well. So they became dominant in the region of the northern Caucasus range. This is where they were partitioned between the people of Togarma, who are described as the people to whom Dhul Qarnayn arrived at, and the people of Scythia or Ashkenaz, who are Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And these were also described by the Persians later on as the Alans, as the Aryans. They couldn't say Aryan, so they said Alan. The Aryan people are also descended from the same. And they constantly raided Persia. So the Scythians or the Alans, the Scythians is the Greek name, the Alans is the Persian name. The Arabic is the Ya'juj and Ma'juj. They constantly raided the Parthians south of the Caucasus range. And this is why the Caucasus range has got one partition in between that connects the north and the south, and it's known as the Darial Gorge. This is in the Georgian language. The Darial Gorge is the Dar Alan, or the gates of the Alan gates. This is the barrier that Dhul Qarnayn built. The Persians called it Dar Alan, the gate that partitioned. And gate, by the way, Dar in the ancient language, in the Sumerians, even in the Georgian language, it's not like we have an extensive vocabulary now. So gate, the same word for gate is the same word for wall, is the same word for barrier, is the same word for partition. It's the same word. So the gates of the Alans is also the barrier that Dhul Qarnayn built. And they maintained this term. It is actually translated from the Georgian Ralani or Darialani as the Caucasian gates or the Iberian gates, which are no longer there. And the photography there in the region shows that there is a ruination, an incredible amount of iron and bronze deposit. Now I'm going to go through this just as briefly as I possibly can, because I know it can get a bit confusing. Too many details. The genealogies can get very confounding if you don't actually have a map to follow the genealogy. So the Ashkenaz became the Khazarian people. The Khazar were predominant in the Eurasian steppe. And these people were known to have, the Scythians were known to have mastered the art of mounted warfare. And this is dominant in their military might. In the modern day military might of the West in particular, is that they are very strong in mounted warfare, in their tanks and their planes, their aircrafts, their drones. And this military might is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself says that he has created a creature whom none can wage war and defeat except he. And this is a commandment that he will then give to Nabi Isa alayhi salam in the future as a directive to take his people, after Dajjal has been defeated, to take his people and retreat to the mountains. The Khazarian people reached their might of governance and dominance in the 10th century. Now, during the Prophet ﷺ's time, there were people who had witnessed that the barrier was still standing, and they described it to the Prophet, and he affirmed that it was indeed Dhul Qarnayn's barrier. Later on, during Umar radiallahu anhu's time, reports came back that the barrier had actually been destroyed. So something had happened in between. And this in between is a pivotal event. The Muslims had already started expanding the boundaries of the Islamic Empire at the time. They were sending delegations to welcome different peoples to Islam. When the Christians saw this, the Christians decided to do the same thing. And when the Jews saw this, the Jews decided that they better act fast. The Khazarian people were withstanding sieges from the Vikings for a very long time. And this speaks to their military might, because the Vikings were a very dominant force on the battlefield. Having withstanding the Vikings and the Muslims and the Christians, the Khazarian people decided that they will accept Judaism as a whole. And this was a political conversion to Judaism. It had never happened in human history before. And it was unprecedented in human history, in the history of the Jews in particular, because as far as the Muslims are concerned, whole empires became Muslims. But as far as Judaism was concerned, in their over 2,000-year history up until that point, it had never happened before. So this is a completely political conversion to Judaism. And this is evident from the ayats of the Quran. The Jews did use this information that Allah revealed via their asking about Dhul Qarnayn. They used this information and they attributed it, and it is not there in their scriptures. It's all been removed. There is no trace of Dhul Qarnayn. There is no mention of these questions. There is no mention of the outcomes. There's no mention of anything in particular. It's all been removed because they have constantly written and rewritten and revised their scriptures to suit their personal agendas. By the 10th century, the Khazars had become so dominant and so powerful that eventually they had to be destroyed. And they were. The Khazarian Empire was destroyed by the Rus. and they were dispersed into Western Europe, and they became dominant in Poland and Austria-Hungary. This is where the European Jews are dominant. It's also where the Yiddish language evolved from. It's a mixture of Hebrew and Polish. But they retained their origin as Ashkenazi Jews. And they decided to change their strategy. No longer will a dominant outward force work. It had to be now ideological. And they began, first of all, by amassing their wealth and building a network of banks. The Rothschild and the Rockefeller families, the wealthiest in the world today, all their lineages back to these Ashkenazi Jews. They established the Knights Templar Order. They instigated the shift, the Great Schism of 1045 between Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics. And when that schism was put in place, and the Roman Catholic Church split from the main church in Constantinople, they began the crusades. And these crusades were vetoed by the Pope. And they had only two places that they wanted to liberate. One was Jerusalem, and the other was Constantinople, because Constantinople at the time was the hub of Eastern Orthodoxy, Christian Orthodoxy, and Jerusalem was the hub of the Muslims. This continued onwards with the crusades. They funded the crusades. They pushed the people forward. They pushed the governments forward, the monarchies forward, and established a network throughout, going all the way into the Holy Land. The good thing was that the Muslims were able to fight this back. They were able to push back, particularly Salahuddin Ayyubi, who is known for having liberated Jerusalem from the Crusades, as well as the following Ottoman Empire, with all the discrepancies and the issues that the Ottoman people had. There were some things that they did that enabled the longevity of Islamic influence in the lands. They then realized that it's not going to work that way either. Now it had to be done on a purely ideological scale, because the Muslims were firmly grounded in knowledge, and this knowledge was unified. Even though there were discrepancies, there were matters of khilaf, there were debates and arguments and opinions and varied views, they were still founded on a Quranic epistemology, a foundation that held the Islamic world together. What eventually transpired in Europe under their influence, the Renaissance age leading into the scientific age, and much of the scientific age was through the Islamic world, because they sent their own people to study in Islamic universities at the time. The Muslim Empire was able to boast libraries with hundreds of thousands of volumes and books when Europe barely knew how to use, the lavatory. So they sent their own people to learn from the Islamic world. And this then led to the scientific revolution, which then led to their so-called Age of Enlightenment. It's what they did with the knowledge that transpired, and then that led to the Industrial Revolution. In 1776, when George Washington founded or gave America its independence, was the same year that the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati, was founded in Germany, in Bavaria, by Adam Weishaupt. And he had a very specific agenda when he wanted to found it. He was, of course, funded by the Freemasons and other Gnostic institutions and lodges. When their agenda is different from the original Illuminati, the Illuminatus founded by Galileo and the likes, because at the time church was against science and scientific development, so they used to meet in secret. That was the original Illuminati. This one had a specific agenda to revise and reinstitutionalize knowledge and its advances in knowledge, and what sort of information needs to be given out. Eventually, this laid the foundation for what became known as the Zionist movement, founded in the late 18th century, 1897, I believe, or 1887, I don't remember. And the Zionist agenda, the Zionist machine, the beast of the earth, the Abbatul Ard, as it is described, was set loose. And their ideology henceforth carved the last 150 years of human civilization, from World War I, and then the events that transpired and led onwards to World War II, and then all the wars that have transpired ever since. This whole agenda of liberating the people, of bringing out democracy and establishing democracy, that has now finally led down. These are where the events are now progressing piece by piece by piece by piece. They're happening almost one after the other, and they're happening rapidly. And this is the present state of the world that we are looking at. Yeah. Okay. Kind of forgot my train of thought there. And I know I'm packing up too much information into one statement. Am I going too fast? It's too much, okay.
Back up from the start of the Zionist movement. Next time we just recap the preamble to the Zionist.
Okay, we can do that.
Then moving on, focus on the pure Zionist. Because that is what is relevant today.
Okay, then let me just give the...
Be able to relate that to the events that are happening now.
Okay, inshallah. So, okay, let me just finish up the part of Dhul Qarnayn in the next 10 minutes. And then, inshallah, next week we'll catch up on the actual backdrop of it through history.
So, the track.
Yeah.
Next week.
Because this is where we have to understand, everybody has to understand what to tell the children, how to relate actually what has happened in the last 4 years, and the real events in the past 2 years.
Right.
And your piece about the revolution that happened in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And they're calling it now.
I'm just
That
curious.
is,
Are you going to label these things?
Label them?
Like, are you going to say these specific events and relate them to this?
If I have the time to
He's talking from a different
yeah.
Can you go public with this information?
Yeah, it's fine.
That's fine. But point is, this event that happened on Washington, and them saying that it's a revolt against America, like any other force, anybody coming in and taking over the capital, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And it is started from internal.
Yeah.
But it is not an overnight issue.
No.
It hasn't started in the last. Trump was just an instrument to make it come out in the, and
right.
That is a creation of Allah.
Yeah.
That piece it is about. Now, if you pull back, when COVID happened, however it happened, leave that aside. Any decent, any person, he knew his popularity was not there.
Mm-hmm.
He could have turned it around and said, now I'm the best guy and I want to privacy. So if you really ponder it, is what did Allah put in us in mind that he started rejecting it.
Mm-hmm.
If it was anybody, said, I've got an opportunity to win the favors of the people. Logical.
Mm-hmm.
So that's point number one. Fine. Everything happened, everything became evident. Reflect back and look at the key indicators.
Mm-hmm.
So that was number one. He said, okay, he missed it because he doesn't know the real world. He was living in a world of his own.
Mm-hmm.
And he could not relate to what is happening on the ground. So give him the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when it became very clear, he started rejecting them. He rejected all the science. He rejected all these Dr. Fauci's
Yeah.
this thing. Everything you reject. Okay, then the elections happen. Fine, he rejected that. We can give that to him because he cannot accept defeat. That in of itself is a phenomenon.
Mhm.
The elections?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so fine, give that to him because that's his personality. Then go back and look at the build up to the Washington. Even when Washington and this thing happened, he was not even prepared to reject. So once we understand how he became an instrument of everybody, and then connect that to the Middle East, what is happening, and look at Netanyahu's history right through the start. There is some comparative.
Mhm.
Exactly. And just that comparative alone minimizes the evil that Netanyahu did because, oh, look, there's this bigger foe here in America. Right? Happening at the same time.
Yeah. So, and if you start from that and focus on that, and then as events will unfold, okay, we will be able to see practically.
Mhm.
Because things are changing too fast.
Yeah.
So if we start getting too much on the historical side, then we will not be able to do it.
No, in that regard, the history is
In
also
history we are
important
covered.
because the concept being applied here is to see the forest for the trees, right? Because if we start focusing only on that specific trees,
No, what I'm saying is this.
He's right though. He's
No,
right.
I
What I'm
understand
saying
that
is
portion, yeah.
You can, what you are doing is fine. You look at it and then you are connecting to the Persian build up to the Gog and Magog. I can connect this. I'll tell you. The Protocols of Zion was a yellow book,
Mhm.
this thick.
Yeah.
I got hold of that in 1970. Because I was in the circle of the elders. And so I don't remember who gave it to me. Right? And all this about their errors at that time and about South Africa's apartheid movement and the Middle East, the 73 war to 67. I was in that circle. So I read that book. Obviously, I don't remember all the details of it, but the substance has always been there, and I haven't been able to get hold of that book again. I don't know where I lost it along the way. But that, when I read it, even at that time when I was 20 years of age, it was an eye opener for me at that time. That look, there is a force.
Mhm.
Makes sense? Now, last point about the financial, the Rothschild, they financed Nazis. I've read the history of all that because I understand. And that YouTube program now, who controls which families are controlling the world. Now that's something. That's it from that side. The other side, the financial circle, you've got a whole economic cycle going in. Complete unemployment, high employment, recession or whatever. But the market, the stock market is going up. Some companies are going this way, but the market on all that. And within that whole economic cycle is the rise of the counter-currency. So if you go from that Zion, you are building the foundation, you are building the control of the wealth, and then you can, as you move forward with the current events on the political side, economic side, and what's it, we will be able to, everybody will be able to see it, and above all, we will know as we move along how to position ourselves. Just really what I'm trying to get to. Understand it and you focus as how do we position ourselves.
No, inshallah, actually, Surah Kahf is going to explain these things in the later details. The last section of the surah is going to explain the specificities.
One more I want to.
Yeah.
We have to individually, collectively, and build our financial life. spiritual, mental, knowledge based, but without financial, we will not be able to.
Inshallah, that's actually the what
will
to
all
do
fall
next. Yeah, it's all the connection because once you understand exactly what is the status quo of your existence, what is the normalcy and the perception of normalcy, then you identify exactly, is that normalcy going to change? And if it is favorable, does it need to change? And if it is changing, then it is unfavorable. So how do you now implement a strategy? The whole idea of Surah Kahf and the guidance from the Quran is not so that you can build a resistance against these people. There are one of three options you can do. Either you follow the example of the Ashab al-Kahf, or the example of Al-Khidr, or the example of Dhul Qarnayn. And the Muslims cannot actually take on the example of Dhul Qarnayn because the true leadership aspect that the Muslims require is not something that can be established in the way we are right now. Which is why one who will guide us is going to be sent to us, Al-Mahdi, who will fulfill the definition of true leadership. The other option is to either retreat, as the Ashab al-Kahf retreated, or the third option is to establish oneself in knowledge. Because the war of Gog and Magog, the front of Gog and Magog, the front of Dajjal is ideological. It is from a mental background. And it's like I said, if you do not philosophize for yourself, somebody else will philosophize for you. And the philosophy drawn is the wisdom of the Quran and the Hadith. Follow that guidance and you should be fine. But get lost in the other person's guidance and it will definitely,
This, the topic that you mentioned right now and the lineage and everything, it's extremely complicated.
It is complicated.
And in addition to that, it's also extremely controversial. So if you cut it off at that lineage in itself, it'll provoke your readers to do the research that they're gonna do anyways after listening to what
No,
you're
but
saying.
the issue, the reason why I am highlighting is this because there are misconceptions and there are a lot of people getting lost in the rabbit hole mentality.
Yeah, there's a
The
lot of rabbit holes
lineage,
that you
as
just
far
approach.
as from the point of the Prophet ﷺ's time, the lineage is no longer an imperative matter. It is the ideological aspect that needs to be examined, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not giving the lineage, is giving the core descriptive, mufsiduna fil ard. They are causes of fasad in the world. And that is what needs to be identified, because once you understand the specificities of this fasad, and you can only understand the specificities of this fasad if you've got something of a litmus test to compare it to. If you want to examine the education system, then you need something of a litmus test. What is the proper educational system? How does Islam describe it? What is the ordained? That is when you examine and say, is that in accordance to this? If it is not, then it is corrupted. Is trade and commerce in accordance to this? If it is not, it's corrupted. And the corruption is such that they use beautiful words, terminologies. The usage of language is dominant, and this is something the Muslims have lacked as well, because we've taken language for granted. Language defines thought, and thought defines culture, because that's how you cultivate your world after that. These people understand language, and I'm not talking about language as talking words of language, but the sciences of language, logic in language, proper grammar, speech, rhetoric in speech. They apply these tools, and this is how the early Muslims were able to defeat them, because they were using their same tools against them. This is the asbab, using the same tools against them. Yeah. And they were able to counter these ideologies. When you apply logic, for instance, you can easily deconstruct what they are presenting. And you can see, I've shown you via examples, plain and clear, how easy it is to deconstruct their ideologies, that you can see the stupidity with which they approach it. Anyway, let's finish this section of Dhul Qarnayn, and inshallah we'll get into a deeper discussion next week. So he said unto them, when they asked him to build this barrier for him, Qala, he said, Ma makkanni fihi rabbi khayrun. Allah has given me, my Lord has given me better than anything you could possibly give me in terms of commission. His being tested, and he's applying the test and fulfilling it in the right way. So he's saying, فَعَيِّنُونِي بِقُوَّةٍ أَجْعَلْ بَيْنَكُمْ وَبَيْنَهُمْ رَدْمًا. Give me provision from you. I need your manpower. I need your resources, so that I will now erect between you and them a radam, a much more massive partition that will last longer. Atuni zubar al-hadid. This is where technology comes in. Modern man, again, you can see the ideologies presented by these people, that these historic people were just primitive, they had no technology, they didn't know anything. We are the evolved in modern day. A construction of this monolithic venture, if you really sit down to think about it, the highest peak of the Caucasus range is, I believe, almost 2 to 2.5 kilometers. And the lowest depth is about 500 or so meters at the lowest point, which is known as the Dajjalic Gorge. That's the lowest point, where the Sadafain meets almost like a V. That's the gorge. He's saying, bring me iron. Hatta idha sawa bayna Sadafain, until he had filled up the Sadafain. So if this is the mountain pass, the Caucasus range, it only has one passageway in between, and that's known as the Dajjalic Pass. And the point where the convergence of these two meet, in between the pass, the narrowest passage is the Dajjalic Gorge. That's the Sadafain, the two parts of that escarpment. And he filled that up with iron. Qalan fuhu, he said then, blow unto them with your bellows to heat up that iron. This is the technology of forging iron into steel. Hatta idha ja'alahu naran, until it became red hot like fire. Qala, he said, atuni ufri alayhi qitra. Bring now copper that I can pour over it. And in my book, the 3 questions, I've explained the scientific side of such a construction. What does it entail? What is its, how did it function the way it functioned with those particular ingredients of iron and copper? And you will have to read that entire chapter to understand the actual construction of this barrier, because it is a scientific phenomenon that the modern man cannot construct. فَمَسْتَعُوا أَنْ يَظْهَرُوهُ وَمَسْتَطَعُوا لَهُ نَقْبًا. They were not able to pass over it, and they were not able to penetrate it. Then he said, قَالَ هَذَا رَحْمَةٌ مِّن رَبِّي. This is a rahmah from my Lord. And remember what Al-Khidr said as well. It is a rahmah from the Lord, from your Lord. This is a rahmah, a mercy from my Lord. فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ رَبِّي. And when the promise of my Lord comes true, جَعَلَهُ دَكَّا. He is going to level this barrier. وَكَانَ وَعْدُ رَبِّي حَقًّا. And the Lord and the promise of my Lord is ever true. It will come true. So this is ordained, prophecy ordained from that point in time. وَتَرَكْنَا بَعْدَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَمُوجُ بَعْدٍ. And we will leave them, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, some of them, clashing like waves to surge over others of them. And next week, inshallah, I'll explain the surging. What does this clash of surging mean? This is the dynamic of Ya'juj wa Ma'juj. One corrupts, the other one comes to fix. The other one corrupts, the other one comes to fix. They're always like this, like waves heading towards the seashore until they reach harmony. وَنُفِخَ فِي السُّورِ فَجَمَعْنَاهُمْ جَمْعًا. When the trumpet is blown, we will gather them all together. Let's stop there at ayah number 99, and inshallah we'll take it up next week. If there are any comments right now, or we can proceed. Okay. inshallah. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بارك الله فيكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
That flow, right? See that in Democrats and Republicans nowadays?
Yeah, so I'll explain the semantic aspects of those flows, the surging of one onto the other, inshallah.
It's a clear dividing. They cannot understand, it's confusion.
Yeah.
Bilateral.
And in watching the speeches, the whole thing, all the reports, messages, watching, like Farid Zakaria's. Interesting to watch Farid. Being a Muslim, not a practicing, but he's got this. And his analysis and his report. Obviously, you have to be read when you look at somebody like Farid and his CNN. You have to constantly listen to him and try to see the word between the lines, because he has to be very careful. Somebody like him or people in this have to be very careful, right? That he is not being picked up because he's Muslim, and so his language has to be so subtle, and he's very intellectual oriented.
There are a lot of Muslims who have been picked up as frontrunners of these people, and this is also one aspect that I'll explain, understanding what the Prophet ﷺ meant when he said that one of them will eventually say, Insha'Allah, at that point, and then the barrier will be completely leveled. This is symbolic, religious symbolism and speech, but what does that actually mean? A lot of Muslims are recruited to their frontrunners, to be their frontrunners. So the recent vaccine that was, propagated through media, that 2 Muslims discovered the vaccine, were apparently working for Pfizer. A lot of Muslims jumping all over the place saying Subhanallah and MashaAllah and like idiots. What does it mean to have somebody in that front line?
It's
as part and parcel of
because in order to be in that part of the front line, you have to what's it called, in that development of that specific vaccine, which is an RNA vaccine.
Exactly.
You have to toil with God's creation.
So
and
these are the
that
barriers.
in itself is against your religion if you're a Muslim.
Right.
So if you created that vaccine,
these are essentially the barriers that you would look at, the 2 front runners that are preventing or holding them back from really encompassing the world completely into darkness, is based on the same ideology that Iblis had presented to Adam and Hawa as a counter ideology to what Allah has ordained as the comprehensive, right? The tree of immortality and a kingdom that never decays is translated into the modern day pursuits of this medical breakthroughs and longevities of life to overcome death and building a world, a utopia that would never decay. And these are the technological fronts. So I will show you exactly how these 2 are translated into these 2 core ideologies, and what does it mean that they are constantly trying to break through. They start in the morning, they come right down to the evening, and then they make some sort of a progress, but Allah places a block again, and then they try again the next day, and then the next day, and they continue doing that. But ultimately they'll be given the breakthrough. So these breakthroughs that they're looking for, how is that explained in light of the hadith?
so for Juman we'll have a proper conversation about this.
Inshallah.